Hi, everyone. It is great to be here. I'm Paul Strolick. I've been a pretty active design leader for the last 20 years inside Fortune 100 organizations that run my own business. I've been a freelancer inside agencies where I've had quite the privilege to spearhead programs of transformation and product innovation, which has just been nothing but exciting, especially when you extend those programs of work across banking, financial services, healthcare, and consumer tech. You really get a great sense of who's doing what and why. Most of my ethos, revolves around to the topic that we are going to discuss today, authentic leadership. And that is predicated on a number of different values that I hold very dear that I hope to share with you all today.
And you're gonna, Paul. I know it. I know it. So, yes, thank you so much for introduction. We're so excited that you're here. All right, Elizabeth, you're next. Tell us who
Yeah,
you are.
I'm Elizabeth Tenyas. I am Aquent's content editorial strategist. So I work with several different writers, internal, external, and oversee the blogs for Aquent Talent, Aquent Studios, Aquent, and Aquent Scout. And I came to Aquent almost 3 years ago after getting out of the military after 10 years. And so I came from the military sector into the civilian sector, and I just keep learning and growing. And I'm just so grateful to be here today with both of you and to be part of Aquent, which has just been a fantastic company.
I love it. And we're excited to hear more about your military leadership experience as well and how that applies here. Everything's kind of come together in this LinkedIn Live. So I'm Susie Hall. I'm president of community and customer engagement here at Aquent. I've been here for 25 years, which has been magical. I launched and ran our vitamin T brand. And then for the past 5 years, I've been building and leading our inside out design leader community for senior leaders of design and creative and operations inside large organizations. So I have had the pleasure of learning from leaders and hearing about challenges for those 5 years. So I'll bring a little bit of that today, but I'm moderating. So this is not about me. This is the Paul and Elizabeth show. No pressure. And this is also the You show. So if you are joining this call here, and you've joined one of our LinkedIn Lives before, we want you to interact with us. So please do put your questions and comments into the chat real time. We are going to answer as many questions as we can as we go through this. Unfortunately, we won't get to every single question, but if we miss it, we'll follow up with you afterwards as well. So please interact. We would love to hear from you, and we're all here to learn. So we have a big topic. We are not going to have all the answers to this topic today, but with your help and from the experience here from Paul and Elizabeth, we're gonna tackle it. We're gonna do it because leadership is broken. Boom, boom, boom. What a headline, right? Before we get started, let's practice interacting. So if you're joining the call here today, we would love to hear from you the answer to this question. Have you ever been ghosted by a leader that you respect? So we're going to talk about ghosting through the lens of you working within your internal team right now and what that means and how it feels to you. I know ghosting has broad implications, but we love to hear from you. This is just a simple yes or no, so give it to us in the chat, please. Have you ever been ghosted by a leader you respect? Meaning you reached out to them, you had what you thought was a great meeting with them, there was supposed to be a follow-up step from there, and it simply didn't happen. Yep. All right, Maggie. There. That's it. Well, we have one. You've come to the right place. I'm just kidding. You've definitely come to the right place. So, there's a lot. Too many times. Thank you, Valerie. Yes, and no. Oh, I love that. LinkedIn user. That's what I can see over here. Ghosting means loss of respect. We are going to talk about that today. So, very relevant topic here. Ghosting is happening right now, and it is not normal. It doesn't feel great. So we're going to start right now with Paul and Elizabeth telling us a little bit about why in the world we think ghosting is happening right now. So Paul, you first. Why in the world do you think ghosting is happening right now?
There's no one answer. And I think many ladies in the design space, technology space, marketing, are struggling with this question as well. And from what I've seen, and I've had many, esteemed colleagues reach out and talk to me about this situation where, they've engaged in original, points of communication. They've sat down with these leaders and they've had some form of agreement where there's going to be some form of ongoing communication. And then that communication is action and silence, complete radio silence. And it leaves one feeling dismayed, baffled, somewhat insecure. Have I done something wrong? Because you had a verbal contract. You had an agreement to uphold, this level of communication in a way that was going to be mutually beneficial for both of you. And former colleague reached out to me with this scenario, saying exactly the same thing. I don't understand. I had this agreement with this senior leader, and I shared a lot of insight, a lot of foresight around how we could help each other, and I just got no response. And what it came back to was really a lack of respect, because that individual communicated that even the executive's EA were embarrassed about the lack of communication being upheld by this senior leader. And we're all busy. We get it. We've got a million meetings on the calendar, but it doesn't take much to say, look, I'm sorry, I haven't responded. These are the things going on. I want you to know I haven't forgotten about you. Please let's stay in touch. That doesn't take much, because I'm a firm believer, if you hold a people leadership position that revolves around high touch communication and interaction, you have a moral, ethical, and professional responsibility to treat others the way you'd like to be treated. So to answer your question specifically, I think it is a bigger issue that revolves around respect. For whatever reason, something has happened that has switched that off in that senior leader, and therefore we have this symptom of ghosting.
Yes. It is, and it's absolutely happening. And again, that, as someone mentioned earlier too, that lack of respect feels terrible. So the impact that can have on the whole organization can be profound. Elizabeth, I know you have some thoughts about this too.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's obviously a lot of reasons. I think one thing that we've done or stopped doing is really training leaders. I think that there used to be a certain level of responsibility that was given to leaders, and we trained them and we prepared them. And now it's just kind of natural. You move up in the corporate ladder, you get into a management position. And that lack of training really, we can really feel it now, where we see leaders that maybe don't have the tools, that maybe aren't empowered, haven't had the training. And with remote work and being further away, it's even harder. It is much easier as a leader if you just have a few minutes between meetings and you just walk to your employee's desk, right? You just pop over and you can say hi and check up on them. But in remote work, you have to be very intentional. You have to go out of your way and build bonds and build connections. And if leaders already lack the training and experience to do it well, it's going to be even harder when they have remote work, because now they have to do the same things of the core leadership training and then amplify it in a remote environment, which may be one of the reasons why we see a lot of places want to go back in person. Even though we've seen the statistics where it's better for the company, it's better for the employees to stay remote, it is harder for leaders. And in some cases, with any sort of ghosting, it's just going to amplify that. So I think that's what we're seeing now, is the impacts of lack of training and the effects of remote work on leadership.
I love that. And there's a comment in the chat that I want to call out. Mark Phillips, thank you for sharing that. But you can see it there on the screen. I am at a stage in my career where I'm preparing for team people leadership, and I have no good recent role models. Oh, that breaks my heart. I totally agree with you. And that is a big part of the problem. Like, there's not just the impact of today, of what you feel like for leaders treating you that way. There's the future acceptance that this is okay. And that is not okay. So also, Lindsay, you put up a quote. I love that quote. Can we put that one up as well? So here's a quote: "We are what we do, not what we intend to do." Paul, I think you're going to like that one a lot.
That's a great one. And I'd like to take a moment to take a step back and really clearly articulate what do we mean by great leadership? How is it defined? And I've spoken to many great leaders, across many different industries about this. And one thing I will have to say is that, firstly, leadership has nothing to do with seniority or one's position in the hierarchy of an organization. it's not about rank. It's not about being in charge. I know many senior managers who sit at the highest level of organizations, but that they are not leaders. We do as they tell us, because they have authority over us. But we are losing trust and we are having difficulty following them. I also know individuals in lower levels of the organizations, people like I, who on a daily basis demonstrate leadership attributes like humility, self-awareness, empathy for others, more so than any of these higher ranking officials. And that's something that really sets these individuals apart. What they're doing is they're making a very clear choice to look after the person to the left of them, look after the person to the right of them, beyond their own self-interests. And if you flip that and you think about the notion of being in charge, it really is about taking care of people in your charge. And, Susie, I know you've heard me, speak about that.
I love it when you say it every time, Paul. Keep saying it.
Because this is about focusing on the people around you so that you can enable them and empower them to succeed. And, it's difficult, but what this is, and Simon Sinek, clarifies this beautifully, is this is what servant leadership is all about. I'm here to support and promote your ambitions and your aspirations versus just serving your bottom line. And that's a big classification right there. And, when I peel back the layers of the onion, I really do look for simplicity in definition when I try to understand certain things like leadership or any other subject. And I think Kevin Kruse, author of Emotional Intelligence, 52 Strategies, and it's the other one he wrote, Great Leaders Have No Rules. Kevin communicated that leadership is a process of social influence, and it is here to maximize the efforts of others in a way that promotes the achievement of a common goal. So, that what I've seen, that is lacking.
Yeah.
And I think there is a gap that leaders, Elizabeth, to your earlier point, need to recognize and need to upskill around.
Mm-hmm. And I am so distracted by this incredible chat happening over here. So I hope everybody is checking out. So there are a bunch of wonderful comments here in the chat. Another one of which is along the lines with what you're saying here, Paul, is that thank you, Arca, for sharing. A leadership role model is hard to find. I feel most people lack ownership and acknowledgement of products and letting the team grow. Great leaders should create more leaders, not pawns. And that happens when you give your team freedom to think. And I think that definitely reinforces what you're saying, Paul. Like, there is a responsibility for leaders to lift up other people. And when ghosting is happening, you get the opposite of that. Like, that is really, that is the opposite of what the leader responsibility is. Right. So thank you. I totally agree with that. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Well, I was just thinking, this is something that I think the military reinforces really well, right? We want to empower leaders at all levels to be leaders. And that's really important, because what you can't be is a leader at the top that's busy making all of the decisions. And Simon Sinek writes about this too. You want to be able to allow people to make decisions on the ground, and you want to be able to encourage and, influence them so that they can be successful leaders in themselves. And that's a part of being a good leader. And, it's kind of like what you were saying earlier, Paul. There's a difference between leading through authority and leading through influence. Good leaders influence their teams and they empower their team so that they can then lead as well. And so that's something that is a skill, certainly, and it must be taught. I was always told, the monkey on your back. That was, it's an old article written about leadership, how leaders pass the monkey down, and it's all about delegation and empowerment and not holding on to everything as one person, because that's not good for that leader, but it's also not good for the team. Teams should have ownership of their task. The more
Mhm.
the more ownership they have, the more control over their work and their team, the more empowered they feel, and the more confident they feel within their work. So I think that's important too.
I love that. So that's coming up in the chat here too. A lot of the attributes of a great leader and a lot of the symptoms of what's happening. Thank you, Fede, for sharing. Companies are not giving leaders time to take care of their organization. They're also putting out signals like that we have too many managers, and so they're cutting layers of manager leadership, which that sends a signal that leadership is not important when it's actually more important than ever. So I think we've done a good job here of defining the challenge and have a lot of agreement here in what a leader's responsibility is, and that it's not necessarily happening right now. So I want to get to the next step that we wanted to talk about, because I think there's going to be a lot of conversation about this. So yes, we're in this state where leaders have a responsibility and it is very challenging to live up to that responsibility. We're acknowledging that. But the fact that it's not happening will have this ripple effect. So it is worth addressing. But the question is, whose job is it to actually fix that problem? And this is what we're not going to solve today. We're not going to necessarily solve this today. But Elizabeth, I know you had some other thoughts as well about from your military experience. So please share, whose responsibility do you think it is?
Yeah, well, it's shared, right? It's shared between the organization and the individual. You have to, as an organization, create a culture where leadership is taught, where it's encouraged, where it's embedded in the culture. Having a company culture that enables leaders to be leaders is important, right? If you're within an organization that doesn't value leadership, that doesn't value taking care of people, even if you're a really good leader, it is really hard to do a good job of it if you are not empowered by the company culture. Now, as a leader, that's also part of your job is
Yeah.
to influence the company culture, right? It's your job to influence the people that work for you and the people around you, to advocate for your team, to advocate for yourself. And leadership is ongoing, right? That's training that you have to take. This is again something the military does well, right? Every time you get promoted and you move up in a level of responsibility, there is training. Everybody
Mhm.
has the same base level of knowledge of what a good leader is, what it looks like. And it's by definition, right? And so it's not always like you don't always get the hands on experience. You don't always get to see it done well, but it's taught. And
Yeah.
as you move up, you continue to learn more. There's additional seminars. I personally had a command where we had to read a book every month and write a paper on it. And then we all got together and discussed it. And we were constantly learning leadership. And that's something that just doesn't happen in the corporate
Yeah.
environment in the same level, right? And so it's something that should be, right? There should be a leadership course, there should be encouraged ongoing learning. And it's not just continuing in your profession, but continuing in your development as a leader. And so
Mhm.
that's something that I think is really important and often missed.
Yes. I think everybody on this call just cringed when you said read a book every month and write a report on it. Or maybe that was just me. It
it
was definitely
wasn't
just me.
it wasn't the best leadership model that I saw. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily think that the culture within that company was healthy. We
Mhm.
also had a saying that I think is on the right track, so I'll share that you always took care of your people first. Your job as a leader was to deal with issues of the team first.
Yeah.
Now, the downside of that was encouraged during your normal working hours and you did your work afterwards. So it was
Yeah.
very normal to stay at work late and we had the
Yeah.
culture of you don't leave before your boss and that was very unhealthy and there was a
Uh-huh.
lot of workload. So leaders were not taken care of, which is important too. You have to check in on your leaders and you have to make sure that they're happy and healthy too or else
Yeah.
they don't lead well. So
Yep.
not perfect, but the sentiment was there.
I'm just making sure everybody doesn't go away and write book reports every month. I'm just putting that out
No.
there. Don't do it. So,
Yeah.
Paul, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this. So we do have a question here. So I think Paul, you might have some thoughts on as well. Thank you, Arca, for saying. Sorry. We have a question. Oh, LinkedIn user. So giving away your influence by supporting. So if leaders are trained and leaders are responsible for going through training and have all of that support, and it's their responsibility, does that give away the power to influence from below? If it's the leader's responsibility, can Does that give away the power to influence from below? What is your direct reports responsibility in this process?
Look, I don't believe so. So the Harvard School of Business did a survey a couple of years ago amongst roughly 1,500 people leaders across 97 countries. And some of the most important skills needed to lead amongst this group were categorized into 5 areas of focus: adaptability, curiosity with empathy, inclusive creativity, comfort with ambiguity, and digital literacy. Now, a few roles ago, back to your question, Susie, around whose responsibility is it?
Mm-hmm.
I led the design partnership for a talent transformation program at work. Now, the responsibility of that transformation came down to a number of different people, but my coalition were Chief People Officer, Chief Diversity Officer, and Chief Talent Officer, people who were embedded into the DNA of the organization's culture, and they were connected at every different level as it related to all forms of communication, authority, hierarchy, and influence. Now, without that coalition, it becomes very difficult to instigate such a transformative change, especially when you have learning and development as a key.
Mm-hmm.
But you must build a guided coalition that comes together as a partnership to instigate such a change. Because leaders on their own right, they won't do this. They won't, go off and spend the time. Some training programs are poorly designed. Some aren't practical and relevant for the cultural challenges that organization is going through. And so, you have to start from the center, from the heart of the organization that revolves around people and capability. It's not easy. It is a journey. It takes time, but you have to influence through that starting point. And I've found that to be incredibly successful versus trying to do it by myself or trying to do it with other leaders who aren't at the heart of the company's DNA.
I love that. Yes. And I definitely think that reinforces it's a shared responsibility, like being able to reach out and build your own communities that can help you through this is important as well. So should the organization just have that great training? They might not have great training. So, and is it the leader's responsibility to just go out and do it on their own? That's not very likely. So it is definitely a shared responsibility. I definitely know, Paul, from when we were preparing for this, that you had some thoughts as well about the leader's responsibility to improve themselves. So what do you think from the leader side, from their own responsibility, what do you think leaders can do to help themselves go back to those great leadership traits and qualities that are not ghosting?
I think it starts with belief and behavior. Okay. Behavior incites action. And the challenge is, with beliefs and behaviors as it revolves around all forms of integrity, creativity, innovation, and inclusion, is that to an extent they are concepts. And in a way they mean different things to different people. Organizations that exhibit high levels of adoption and behavioral change have shared mindsets. They have shared beliefs in a way that promotes what is classified as transmitted action, so that you are putting these beliefs into an action plan. Back in Australia, I worked for an organization called the REA Group, and they're Australia's largest online property portal, very, very similar to your Zillow or your Trulia over here. And one of the key differentiators that organization demonstrated as it related to leadership change was the ritualistic approach to practicing these actions in and around prioritized programs of work. So we would have a daily stand-up that was a ritual around the actions that we did yesterday, the actions that we are doing today, and the actions that will be performed tomorrow. Very quickly, very agile orientated. No, I don't like to use the A word, but but what it did was it created a sense of repetition. Now, weekly, what those leaders did was they created a ritual around retrospectives. What did we do well? What did we do not so well? And where could we improve? Now, this wasn't orientated around technology. It wasn't orientated around design. It was orientated around people and capability. It was a cultural imperative that everybody would get into the habit of practicing this way of being so that they could improve a certain way of doing. And it was probably after the 2-year mark that we really started to see subconscious organizational change, where everything was just baked into these patterns because it was repetitive. And we kept influencing this mandate in as many conversations as possible with as many cross-functional groups as possible. That was one of the best examples of cultural and capability change inside of a very large organization.
Yeah, in support of leadership skills that can be helpful at any level of the organization. So speaking of levels, we did get a question. Mark Phillips, thank you for putting a question. A lot of career development content I've seen is targeted to very junior talent. Are there good mid-career resources? So tell me if I'm wrong, because you two are the experts, but I feel like the mid-career is where you can really develop and be learning leadership qualities that can change organizations as you grow through your career. So any thoughts on how to develop yourself if you're in that mid-career space?
I mean, I think you're right, Susie. Mid-career is really kind of a game changer. I mean, there's no pressure like when you go from managing 2 people to 30. It amps the ante quite a bit, and you face challenges in ways that you haven't before. Whether or not there's a standard resource, I don't know if there's a good answer for that. I know the military trains at each level. So when you move up a level, you get that additional training there. And I think that that's really good because it's targeted at the level of authority and responsibility of that position. And so I think that is very helpful. But I also think beyond that, some of the best ways you can do that is through mentorship. I think mentorship's a really great way, pairing with a senior leader within the organization or outside of your organization. And one that you look up to is really important, that you've seen has done it well, because chances are they have faced the same challenges that you have and had to overcome them and have really good advice. Because when you're in that point, when you begin facing, people issues, you're having to juggle new responsibilities, sometimes the best help and the best resource that you can get for leadership development is somebody who's done it already and done it well. That is a really great resource.
I love that. And speaking of mentorship, I just put this into the chat that hopefully goes to the chat. But I know because we have an audience of design and creative folks here because AQuint, yay. So if you haven't heard of ADP List, it's adplist.org. That is a free mentorship resource where a lot of leaders go and volunteer their time to help support people who are at various stages of their career. But that seems like a good point to be connecting with leaders in your mid-career. So Paul, I'm stopping talking so you can talk. What are your thoughts about mid-career? How can people begin developing those skills then?
I think mid-career is the best opportunity to really accelerate leadership competencies, because what mid-career is doing is it's starting to position you as it relates to taking care of people. And this is where, back to my earlier points, where you are looking to others, to promote, to empower, so that their success becomes your success. And so what I've done in the past is, because a lot of internal programs haven't been very contextual to how I want to evolve, I've reached out to many other leaders, in the communities I've been part of, and I've simply connected with them. And I've simply asked them for guidance and support around a couple of things. Here's my situation. Here are the challenges I'm faced. These are my ambitions, and here is the vision. And I've bundled that, together in a way that creates somewhat of a roadmap for myself. And what I've been looking for are the soft skills, I guess the soft skill competencies above and beyond the technical skills. So someone who communicates this incredibly well is a gentleman by the name of Julian Treasure, who coined the term HAIL. And HAIL stands for honesty, authenticity, integrity, and morality. And it's about the ability to greet or acclaim enthusiastically. It's about how you show up. And so these were very important characteristics I needed to demonstrate as it related to the very simplistic notion of helping others, in addition to the willingness and the commitment to give back. You've been hired into this role for a reason. Your expertise, your experience, your ability to gel with the culture. People have recognized this personal brand of yours, and they want you to succeed. So leverage those great points, and amplify how you show up. And so that's just been my approach, only because internal training programs have been a little antiquated and a little bit outdated.
Yeah.
But I would start with your network, and I would start with other leaders, who are writing about this, who are talking about it, and reach out. Don't be shy. I'd like to put my hand up to say I've actively helped and supported many different people who have been coming straight out of college versus who have been in, middle management role for roughly 5 to 6 years, and they want to take it the next step. But that's where I start.
I love it. And to your point too, what a great way to learn, teach, right?
Yes.
It is a great reminder of all of the leadership skills that you have learned, and sometimes can get you back on track by realizing when you're talking to someone else, hey, this is something that I know how to do, and maybe I'm not doing it every day. So I love your point there too, Paul, about checking in on how you're showing up to other people, building your network. Elizabeth, did you have other thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think there's a really great point here about assessment. I think it's no surprise to anyone that the military has struggled with good leadership at a lot of times. And one of the things that they've implemented recently into their leadership assessment is this 360 feedback. And what they do is they've reached out to people that work for leaders at various levels at various times, and they have them give anonymous feedback. And this is really important for that development, right? Because they can see if you're only asking your direct reports and you know that it's coming from them, you are not going to get honest feedback because they are afraid of how it will influence them. And it probably will, if we're being honest. But if you reach back to other people, and really this is the organization that has to do it on their behalf so they can truly provide anonymous feedback, it allows them to face that and grow from it. But you have to be able to really look at how you're performing and ask for feedback and continually improve. I have been a leader where I am not proud of, but I learned a lot from it. And that's what's really important, is that you're constantly looking at that and saying, okay, what did I do well? What did I do poorly? How can I do better? And that is something that organizations can implement to help their leaders.
I love that. Yes. And also goes back to something that is in the chat, or goes directly to something that is in the chat. What we're talking about is we're humans, right? When you think about role models and people that you look up to as leaders, no matter their title or where they are in the organization, these are some really great traits. Natalie, thank you for putting these into the chat. Natalie Rose says, honesty, authenticity, integrity, and love. Oh, don't we all want that leader? We certainly do. And we want to be seen as that leader too. So great tips here. Looking at how you show up, reaching out and building your network and learning. I'm a little bit biased, but I lead a community for leaders. So I'm going to say I have seen the magic happen when people come together and hear perspectives from others. And it reaffirms that there are a lot of things that so you're not alone. You're facing a lot of the same challenges. It also reminds you of things that you used to do that you're not doing anymore. And it gives you support to be able to continue to grow. So those are really great tips. Okay. So back again to whose job is it to fix it? We started out with saying it's a shared responsibility, and certainly it is, right? So there are things that you can do as a leader to get better, to check in on yourself. There are things organizations can do to improve their training. I'm so curious though, because I've yet to hear a leader come to one of our roundtables being so excited about ongoing training that they get or support that they've gotten as they moved into leadership from their organizations. What would that look like, or what are some of the challenges there that are making that broken so leaders aren't getting support? Thoughts on that?
I think, time is a big factor, and attributing any form of development back to their priorities often gets lost in conversation. And
Mhm.
so, there is that inherent belief that, leaders feel that they don't need to be trained because they're in a leadership role, and they will negate upskilling. I think, that's a mistake. Um, we are struggling right now with leadership that really does demonstrate those five things I mentioned as it relates to adaptability, comfort with ambiguity, as well as digital literacy. Um, I keep coming back to a 2020 MIT Sloan study that was done in partnership with Cognizant, and it was done. It was done with, I think it was about 4,000 participants over 97 countries. And one of the things that they communicated was they felt that out of everybody surveyed, only 16% were comfortable and confident that their leaders could show up with the necessary skills,
Wow.
that they were invested in their own development, that they felt that they were digitally competitive. There was an element of mindset and behavioral characteristics that put others above themselves. So the statistics are quite low, and they're quite alarming. It does create a fantastic new opportunity for leaders who are responsible for things like HR, talent, recruitment, diversification of skill set, to really lean in and ask themselves, well, what does a leadership talent development transformation look like for an organization? Because as we know all too well, the very fabric of our digital economy is changing at such an unprecedented rate that everybody's heads are exploding. If you wind the clock back 10 years, people were struggling with digital transformation. Now you layer that with the emergence of AI, and it's just too much. So how do you navigate that in a way that sort of slows down to speed up, but it puts the culture and capability first? Because a lot of people have been asking me, well, Paul, what do we do about AI? How do we train ourselves around AI? And I keep explicitly communicating that AI at this point is still very much experimental. Okay, it is still very much an emerging technology that is a tool. Now, until AI has a universally adopted multilateral experience strategy, it will still be at that tool level. So focus on your culture and capability to meet these growing challenges, to meet these growing demands of our changing digital technology, our digital technology economy, in a way that is upskilling, in a way that is positive and proactive.
Yeah.
That's my best advice, because we do have a talent war right now, and that's a big problem.
Yes. And we have a long but awesome comment here in the chat. Thank you, Gabriel, for sharing this. Yay. Thank you, Eric, for putting that up right there on the screen so I don't have to keep up with the chat. Love you. This is a really good point. It is not only difficult for a leader to carve out their own time when they have lots of responsibility, but sometimes the organization or your leader does not want you to take that time to be able to learn. They want you focused on productivity, not thinking that, improving yourself as a leader might improve productivity. So Elizabeth, I know you said something about this already. Making it a priority is the priority, right?
Yeah,
But-
and that's a part of organizational culture too. I was always taught that, like, when you come in as a leader, I think we're expecting leaders to come in at a running start, and they're like, we looked at your resume and you have all these skills, make changes. But I was always taught that you spend the first day as a leader assessing, that you shouldn't make any changes. You should assess what's going on, what the team looks like, what that, what the dynamics are. And then from there, you can begin to make a plan. And we also have, I always grew up with this idea that you sit down with your leader and you go over what your leadership philosophy is, what your
Mm.
goals are, what your expectations are, and you have that meeting with your leader. And then that gives them time to process and understand what the organizational goals are, what the
Yeah.
goals are for the team. And then they take all of that, processing it, assessing the organization, and then they come out with their plan, with their
Mhm.
philosophy and their assessment. But that's time, right?
Yes.
Organizations have to allow for that time, because what happens is that if you don't allow for that time and embed in the culture that your leadership's
Yeah.
responsibility is to provide you with that information and that time, then you go in and you make changes too soon, too fast. And often,
Sure.
that can lead to mistakes, and
Yeah.
that can lead to you rubbing your team the wrong way. And
Hmm.
that has to be embedded at all levels to
Yeah.
sort of allow for that and
Yeah.
that development.
Absolutely. So, Paul, I bet you have some thoughts on this because you can't. I love what you're saying, Elizabeth, but you can't always pick your leader. Okay, you can't
Right.
mostly pick your leader. And for the record, everybody's reorging and changing. Like
Yeah.
all the organizations are changing all the time. Paul, what are your thoughts on this? When your leader doesn't support your growth or
Yeah,
footprint?
it's difficult. You need to take a step back and ask yourself the very question that revolves around fight or flight. Right?
Mm.
You fight this in a way that puts your self-interest first, um, or do you, take the opportunity to move on?
Right.
I was told by, a very good mentor of mine many, many years ago, we're only given so much time on this earth. Be mindful of where you spend it and how you spend it, because you can never get it back.
So,
And so I go into these conversations thinking about my time and the value I want to get out of this leader. And if that leader does not show up wanting to support me, so that at the end of the day, I'm coming back answering 3 questions. Am I learning? Am I growing? And am I earning? Not necessarily monetary earning, but am I earning the respect? Am I earning the accolades? The ability to have that seat at the table to voice a view that can hopefully influence with impact. And if the answer is 2 out of 3, no, then you should think
yeah.
about other endeavors, because sometimes you need to know when to swim with the current versus swimming against. And I can tell you now, from observing many different leaders, when change is put in front of them and you look at defined actions that have been put in place to reinforce things like culture and capability, the biggest challenge is that these actions, as it relates to change of behavior or change of focus, they tend not to be orientated and directed around culture.
Right.
They tend to be focused on output versus the cultural outcomes that can then accelerate change long term. And that's a big problem, because we've all heard, we've all been part of the conversation where organizations have said we need more consistency with the way we deliver. We need more consistency as it relates to our brand. Well, guess what? If you want to amplify consistency with continuity at scale, you have to change how you are operating with consistency and continuity at scale. Otherwise, you will fall into that category of wanting this new shiny object, but not having the ability or willingness to change how you realize it. Now, that starts to sound very familiar, right? Like the definition of insanity, right? we want change, but we're not prepared to change ourselves.
Right.
And again, it is cultural, because we have many different factors influencing these decisions, like revenue, quarterly results, stakeholder and shareholder price, the bottom line. And these are very real challenges. Sometimes you don't necessarily need a great big transformation to realize this change. Sometimes it starts with a small ripple or a small little pebble, a stone falling that creates an avalanche. That might be a program of work. Yeah. I've advocated at times to select a program of work that is not too ambitious, not too bold and not too costly, but demonstrate these values within that program of work so that you move from the theory and the concept or saying through to the doing and the measurable outputs that are the results of all those actions and those beliefs coming together.
Yeah.
And bring that partnership, bring that coalition together so that whatever you're working on, you're doing so with a shared vision. Then report that up, measure that up, sing and, shout about those results. Sometimes that, those small little, stones can create that avalanche by which greater change can happen. If that, is an option for you, I would encourage you to do that. Back to my original point, I would, at that point, make it well known to your chief talent, chief people officers that we're not only seeing a great outcome in this program of work, but we are seeing a great transformation as it relates to the diversification of skill set and capability.
Yeah. Which is so you going back to as well, what you communicate can make change. Even how you communicate around the goals and expectations that are set of you, you have the ability to help make change there as well. Yeah. So this has been amazing. So we're at time really, but I know what we wanted to do was end on a note of everybody here on this call. Thank you so much for all of your comments and chat. Like, I just want to read all of those all day. And don't worry, those will stay on the LinkedIn page along with the recording, so you can refer back to those. So thank you for all of those insights and thoughts and resources in there too. So for those who missed any of the comments, go back and get those. But what I would love to end us with is just the answer to one little question. Ready, Elizabeth? You're going first. Okay. So yes, what is one tip, one thing that you think people can do as individuals to help improve the situation, help fix leadership?
That's one thing that people can do. I think as a leader, one thing that you can do to fix leadership is to protect your people. I think that this is really important to build that circle of trust within your team and within your people, to advocate on their behalf, to empower them, and to protect them from any of the chaos that may be going on outside of the organization. I have done it poorly as a leader. I've done it well as a leader, but the impact of that bond that you build with your team, those are the soldiers that will go to war with you, right? Are the ones that have your back because you've had theirs. And that's really important to building that. We're going to do what's right for the organization. We're going to do what's right for the team. We're going to work harder because it needs to be done, is protecting your people.
Yeah. Love it. And nice way to wrap in military, but not very good. Thank you, Elizabeth. Paul, what do you think? What's one thing that people can do?
Oh, one thing.
I know there's so many things, but because I think we all agree that we're all part of the problem. We can all be part of the solution, right? So
yeah, I think to Elizabeth's point around team, I think that's incredibly important. That is foundational to any leader's success. Your ability to amplify with influence the visibility of everybody on your team so that you're creating a very empowered and inclusive environment is absolutely paramount. I think a very fast follow-up to that is, and that's an ongoing battle. That is, it's not set and forget. That is every day, every week. That is something that needs constant work. Is focus on the highest value work with the most influential partners. That is probably the most business-centric commercial advice I can give, because the most influential partners will have, I guess, the most sway, and the most valuable program of work will have the most revenue. It should, in theory. And so you get those right, then, again, the battle is certainly not home imposed, but it positions you for more success. It positions you to influence, again, with impact at scale, and maybe allows you to permeate deeper into that organization because you have those wins. You have that case study reference to say, well, look, this is the way I did it in the past. These are the challenges we face, and these are the outcomes we were able to realize over just the outputs. And that's
I love it. And I'm gonna share one thing that came from a roundtable that I really loved. One of the leaders in our Inside Out community said, as a tip, when you're working with a leader, you want to influence up, you want to help support, go to your leader and ask what support they need, because nobody's asking them that. So whether you are leading people right now, you can assess yourself, you can revisit what you're doing as a leader, or you're working with a leader you want to help support who's not there yet. I think there's something we can all do to help make it better. So thank you everybody for being here today. We are going to put a few links here in the chat. Obviously they've already suggested it themselves, but if you want to reach out to Elizabeth and Paul, they are more than happy to connect with you and continue this conversation. And if we missed your question, so sorry, we will check back in with you based on the comments that you shared here as well. So Paul, where can people find you?
Yeah, please don't be a stranger. I'm an active LinkedIn member, and I look to give back. I value, and I get a real buzz sharing a lot of this information with other people, so I can see them grow and develop into better leaders. So please don't be a stranger. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to connect.
Thank you, Paul. Elizabeth?
Well, gosh, I don't have the great leadership that Paul does, but I'd be honored if somebody wants to connect with me. I'm also on LinkedIn, just my first and last name, and I would love to share any insights I gained from my 10 years in the military and any continued growing and learning that I have done, if it can be of use.
I love it. This is what's the magic of doing these calls. So thank you everybody for being part of our LinkedIn Live here today. I know together we can help make leadership better for everybody. So see you again next time. Thank you.